Out there, beneath the red glow of a dying sun, a lone cowboy rode across the dust-choked plains on a horse as worn as his soul. His name was Luke Carter, a man once full of dreams, now left with nothing but an old saddle, a letter of inheritance, and a heart too proud to beg for mercy. The ranch he'd inherited wasn't the blessing folks thought it was. It was a skeleton of splintered fences, broken dreams, and a silence that seemed to whisper the ghosts of those who came before him. Yet, in that ruin, something stirred, something ancient and forgotten, waiting for the right man, or perhaps the right heart, to uncover it. The locals laughed when he rode in, calling him the broke cowboy with a broken horse. But Luke saw something they didn't. The land may have been dead, the house barely standing, but there was a feeling buried deep in the soil, a pulse that seemed to hum beneath the dust. His only companion, an aging Mustang named Dusty, limped beside him with eyes that carried their own kind of wisdom. Together, they faced a land that had been abandoned, cursed, and whispered about in saloons for decades. Yet neither man nor beast could turn away from it. As the nights grew colder and the coyotes sang from the canyon's edge, Luke began to notice strange things. Dusty would stop at certain spots on the property, pawing at the ground, ears twitching like he could hear something from below. At first, Luke thought it was just the old horse losing his mind, until one moonlit night when the horse unearthed something that didn't belong to any rancher. A carved stone, marked with the symbol of the Apache, a tribe whose spirits were said to still guard those sacred hills. And in that instant, Luke knew the inheritance he'd received was far greater and far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. There was power in that land, a secret older than the fences that framed it and stronger than the greed of men who once tried to claim it. Luke could feel it, in the wind, in the earth, and in the watchful eyes of his horse. It was as if the past itself was breathing through the dust, calling him toward something he was never meant to find. Every dawn brought new questions. Who had buried that stone? Why did the Apache protect this place? And why, after all these years, had fate chosen him, a man with nothing left to lose, to uncover it? That's where his story begins, not with gold or glory, but with a man, a horse, and a secret carved into the bones of the desert. What Luke and Dusty were about to discover would test their courage, their loyalty, and the fragile line between the living and the forgotten. Because sometimes, the poorest cowboy holds the key to the richest mystery the West ever buried. The first mornings on the ranch were colder than Luke expected, the kind of cold that seeped through the bones and whispered reminders of everything he had lost. The wind carried the smell of dry wood and ash, and every creak of the barn told him stories of years gone by. He woke before the sun, wrapped in an old blanket that once belonged to his father, and looked across the land that was now his. The fences were bent, the roof of the house sagged, and the well had long since dried. Yet, despite it all, something inside him refused to leave. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was desperation, or maybe, deep down, he felt that this land still had one last secret to tell. Dusty, his horse, followed him everywhere, not out of habit, but out of something closer to trust. The old Mustang seemed to understand the man's silence, moving with him through the ruins as though he, too, were searching for something lost. Luke had seen better days, but Dusty had seen worse. The scars across his hide told stories of battles and endurance, of a spirit too strong to die. Together, they became the last echoes of a forgotten time, two survivors standing against a land that wanted them gone. Each day, Luke worked until his hands bled. He mended what he could, patched the roof with dry boards, rebuilt half a corral, and tried to coax life from the brittle soil. Every strike of the hammer was a conversation with the past. He could almost hear his father's voice telling him that the land doesn't give unless you earn it. And though Luke had inherited the ranch, it felt less like a gift and more like a test, one that the West itself was watching closely. But the nights were different. When the sun disappeared and the stars came alive, the air changed. Luke could feel eyes on him, not human, but ancient, something that lingered in the earth, beneath the stones and sand. He'd hear whispers in the wind, words he couldn't understand, yet somehow they felt familiar. Dusty would grow restless, his ears twitching toward the canyon beyond the fence line. There was something out there, something that called to both man and beast. One night, while fixing a lantern, Luke noticed Dusty pawing the ground near the old oak behind the house. The horse snorted, uneasy, then stomped again. Luke followed, holding the lantern high. Beneath the roots of the tree, the soil was loose, freshly disturbed. His heart quickened. He knelt and began to dig, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the sense that whatever he was about to find would change everything he thought he knew about the ranch, and maybe even himself. The shovel hit something solid. Luke froze. The lantern's light flickered over what appeared to be a wooden box, its edges carved with intricate markings that time had not erased. They weren't English letters. They were Apache symbols, etched deep into the grain, as though whoever carved them wanted the message to last forever. Luke brushed off the dust, his pulse heavy in his throat. He didn't know much about the Apache, but he knew enough to understand that their symbols weren't written lightly. Every line meant something. Every mark carried power. When he pried the box open, the hinges groaned like an old spirit waking from a long sleep. Inside, he found a small bundle wrapped in faded animal hide. The moment he touched it, the wind howled through the canyon, and Dusty reared back, eyes wide with fear. Luke held his breath as he unwrapped the bundle, and there, glinting under the lantern light, lay a small obsidian amulet carved in the shape of a horse's head. Its eyes were made of turquoise, and though it was cold to the touch, he swore it pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. That night, sleep had not come easy. Luke lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the amulet resting on the table beside him. The air felt heavier now, thick with unseen presence. He dreamt of fire and shadow, of riders painted in red clay, galloping beneath a blood moon. He saw the same symbol, the horse, marked on a canyon wall, glowing like embers. And in the distance, a voice whispered his name. When he awoke, the amulet was warm. By dawn, he couldn't ignore any longer. He saddled Dusty and rode toward the canyon, the place the locals called Whispering Hollow, a stretch of land most avoided. They said the Apache spirits still roamed there, protecting something buried deep within. The ride was long, the air dry and thin, and yet every gust of wind seemed to guide him. Dusty moved as if he'd been there before, as if some forgotten instinct pulled him onward. As the canyon opened before them, the sunlight caught on the rock walls, revealing faint carvings of warriors, horses, and spirals that led toward a single point, a dark cave sealed by fallen stone. Luke dismounted, staring in awe. He knew then, this was no coincidence. The inheritance, the horse, the ranch, even his ruin, all of it had led him here. The Apache's secret his horse had uncovered was not just buried in the earth. It was buried in destiny itself. The cave's entrance loomed like a mouth waiting to speak, its jagged edges painted with the ochre of centuries. Luke stood motionless, the amulet burning faintly against his chest, as if urging him forward. Dusty snorted and pawed the ground, uneasy but unwilling to retreat. The canyon was silent. No birds, no wind, just the echo of Luke's heartbeat reverberating against stone. When he finally stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the scent of ancient smoke and earth filled his lungs. He lit his lantern and followed a narrow path that twisted deeper underground, each footstep pulling him further away from the world he knew. The walls were covered in drawings, horses, men, symbols, and spirals, all etched with precision, telling a story older than any Western legend he'd ever heard. He stopped before one scene that froze his breath. A man standing beside a horse carved from shadow, both facing a great fire beneath the stars. Above them, a line of Apache script stretched across the stone. Though he couldn't read it, something deep within him understood its message, a prophecy of return, of a guardian bound to both man and beast. His hands trembled as he reached out to touch the carvings, and for a moment, it felt as if the rock itself pulsed beneath his fingers. A gust of wind roared from deeper within the cave, extinguishing the lantern. Darkness swallowed him whole. Luke stumbled back, heart pounding, when suddenly, a faint glow flickered from the walls. The carvings themselves had begun to shimmer with soft light, like fireflies trapped in stone. The amulet around his neck responded, glowing brighter, synchronizing with the rhythm of his heartbeat. And then, faintly, came a voice, not in English, not in any language he knew, but clear enough to chill his soul. It spoke through the cave, through the earth, whispering a name he hadn't heard since his father died. He ran out of the cave, gasping for air, the morning sun blinding him as he emerged back into the canyon. Dusty was there, waiting, restless but unharmed. Luke mounted quickly, gripping the reins with shaking hands, and they galloped back toward the ranch. He didn't understand what he had just seen, but he knew one thing. The amulet was not a relic. It was alive, and it had chosen him. That night, the storm came. Lightning cracked across the desert. Rain falling like a curse lifted too late. Luke sat by the window, staring at the amulet glowing faintly on the table. The voice from the cave echoed in his mind. His father's voice, yet older, heavier, carrying the weight of something sacred. It spoke of debt, of guardianship, of a promise made long before Luke was born. And as thunder shook the ground, Dusty neighed outside, staring into the distance where a single torch burned, far beyond the fence line, where no man should have been. Luke grabbed his rifle and stepped into the rain, the mud swallowing his boots as he approached the edge of the property. The torchlight flickered near the old well, illuminating the outline of a man standing motionless. His hat was wide-brimmed, his coat long, but as Luke drew closer, the stranger vanished into thin air, leaving only the flame, still burning, protected from the downpour as if untouched by the storm. Luke's breath came in shallow bursts. He'd seen mirages before, but nothing like this. He took another step, and the amulet beneath his shirt pulsed again, reacting to something unseen. The next morning, he found a torch still burning. But beneath it lay something new, a bundle wrapped in deer hide, identical to the one he'd found under the oak. Inside was a single feather painted red and black, tied with horsehair. He remembered seeing it carved on the cave walls, the mark of the Apache guardians. It wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. Someone, or something, wanted him to return to the canyon. Dusty seemed to sense it too, pacing near the fence line as if waiting for Luke's decision. He couldn't ignore it. By noon, he saddled Dusty and set off once more toward Whispering Hollow. The storm had washed the desert clean, leaving behind a silence too perfect to be natural. The path to the canyon was easier this time, as though the land itself had shifted to guide him. When he arrived, he noticed something new. The cave entrance was no longer sealed. The fallen stones had moved, revealing a passage lit faintly by blue light from within. Inside, the glow grew stronger. The walls pulsed gently, alive with patterns that shifted as he moved. At the end of the passage stood a chamber, circular, vast, and carved with images of horses that seemed to gallop through fire. In the center stood a stone pedestal, and atop it, a bowl filled with glowing embers that never turned to ash. Luke approached slowly, every step echoing like a heartbeat. The amulet burned against his skin, and when he raised it toward the light, the flames roared higher, illuminating something hidden behind the chamber. A painting of a cowboy and his horse, bound together by a trail of lights stretching toward the heavens. Luke fell to his knees, overcome. The figure in the painting looked just like him. The same hat, the same build, even the same scar above the right eyebrow, a mark he'd earned years ago in a bar fight. His chest tightened as realization struck him like lightning. This wasn't just a prophecy. It was a cycle, one that had been repeating for generations. The Apache's secret wasn't gold or treasure. It was legacy, a guardian spirit passed from man to man, through the bond of a single horse. And now, that spirit lived in him. The revelation shattered every certainty Luke had left. He stood before the glowing mural, his thoughts spiraling like a desert wind. The prophecy wasn't meant for some hero from the past. It was meant for him. But why? What did it mean to be a guardian in a land that had long forgotten its soul? He touched the wall gently, and as his hand met the stone, warmth spread through his arm, not burning, but comforting, like sunlight through dust. The horses carved along the wall began to shimmer again, and for a fleeting moment, Luke saw them move. Herds of ghostly stallions ran through the chamber, their hooves thundering without sound, their eyes blazing with the same turquoise light as the amulet. Dusty neighed behind him, uneasy but resolute. Luke turned to see the old Mustang standing at the entrance, his silhouette framed by the glow. For the first time, Luke realized something he'd never dared to believe. Dusty wasn't just his horse. The amulet had awoken something ancient in the creature, a link that ran deeper than life itself. The Apache had always spoken of spirit horses, animals chosen by the earth to carry the souls of warriors long gone. And Dusty, with his scars and silent strength, was one of them. He wasn't guiding Luke. He was remembering him. Luke stepped closer, placing a hand on the horse's mane. "What are you trying to show me, old boy?" he whispered. Dusty turned toward the deeper part of the chamber, snorting once before walking forward. There, at the far end, Luke found another carving, this one half buried beneath centuries of dust. He brushed it clean and froze. The image depicted two figures standing at the mouth of the canyon, a cowboy and a horse, surrounded by the same flickering flame that burned within the amulet. Below them, the inscription read, "Only when the bond is whole shall the land awaken." The words echoed in Luke's mind long after he left the cave. That night, as the desert wind howled across the ranch, he couldn't sleep. He thought of his father, of the men who'd owned this land before him, of every soul who had broken themselves against its cruel beauty. Maybe this was what the West had been trying to tell him all along, that some inheritances aren't about money or land, but about purpose. And that purpose, no matter how buried, always finds its way home. As dawn bled across the horizon, Luke made a vow. If this land carried a spirit, he would protect it. If the Apache had left behind a duty, he would honor it. And if Dusty's eyes carried the fire of 1,000 lives, he would follow wherever they led. The broke cowboy had inherited more than a ruined ranch. He had inherited a legacy written not in blood, but in dust, wind, and the quiet heartbeat of the earth itself. The following days unfolded with strange calm. Luke felt different, grounded yet restless, as though the land itself had begun to breathe beneath his boots. The crops he'd planted weeks ago began to sprout, despite the lack of rain. The animals returned to the nearby creek, and the nights grew warmer, filled with the distant song of coyotes that no longer sounded like warning, but like acknowledgement. Something had shifted, the kind of change that could only come from the hands of the unseen. He spent most mornings near the oak tree, where the amulet had first been found. It now hung around Dusty's neck, glowing faintly whenever the wind picked up. Luke talked to the horse more these days, not because he expected answers, but because silence felt too sacred to waste. He told stories of his father, of his failures, of the loneliness that had followed him through every town and saloon. And though Dusty said nothing, his presence was answer enough. It was as if the horse's steady breathing carried the patience of the whole desert, timeless, enduring, unjudging. But not everyone shared Luke's peace. One evening, 3 riders approached from the east, their silhouettes framed by the dying sun. Strangers, by the look of their long coats and polished rifles. They stopped at the edge of the property, eyes scanning the land with greed, disguised as curiosity. "Heard this place ain't as empty as it used to be," one of them said, spitting dust from his mouth. "Word in town is there's gold or something buried here. Apache gold." Luke stood silent, the rifle resting on his shoulder, but his heart beat steady, not from fear, but from something older, deeper. He warned them to leave. They laughed. "You think you can keep it all to yourself, cowboy?" One sneered. But the moment he took a step forward, Dusty reared, eyes blazing with that unearthly turquoise fire. The men stumbled back, startled. The air grew heavy, charged, as if the whole desert had turned its gaze toward them. The wind rose suddenly, carrying sand and whispers that didn't belong to the living. Within seconds, the men mounted their horses and fled, shouting curses that vanished into the wind. When the silence returned, Luke looked at Dusty, whose breathing had steadied once more. "So that's what you are," Luke murmured. "A guardian." He realized then that the stories he'd once dismissed, tales of Apache protectors, of the spirits who guarded the sacred ground, weren't myths. They were warnings. The land was alive, and it would defend itself through those who carried its mark. And now, that guardian spirit was bound to him. The days that followed were quieter, but the air never lost its tension. Luke could feel the land watching him, not with eyes, but with presence. The whispers at night grew softer, almost like a lullaby sung by unseen voices. He started to understand them, not through words but through feeling. The Apache spirits were not haunting the ranch. They were guarding it, protecting the connection between man, horse, and earth. Each sunrise brought a sense of renewal, yet beneath it, Luke sensed that something bigger was coming, something the prophecy hadn't revealed. One evening, while tending to the corral, Luke saw a figure standing on the ridge beyond the canyon. It wasn't one of the townsmen or a passing traveler. It was a woman, wrapped in a faded red shawl, her face hidden beneath a wide hat. Dusty raised his head, alert but calm. She didn't move or speak, just watched, the wind tugging gently at her clothes. Luke blinked, and she was gone. When he reached the ridge minutes later, all he found was a feather, the same red and black marking as before. He picked it up and knew then. The spirits were preparing him. That night, he dreamed again. The cave returned, brighter this time, and the mural now complete. The cowboy and horse surrounded by firelight, facing a darkness that seemed to crawl from the earth itself. A storm of shadows moved toward them, devouring everything in its path. And as the fire dimmed, Luke saw his own reflection in the cowboy's eyes, holding the amulet against his chest as the storm raged on. He woke drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. Dusty stood outside the window, staring toward the horizon where the canyon lay, as if he'd seen the same vision. The next morning, Luke found the first sign of what the dream had warned him about. The creek had turned murky, the animals restless. The wind carried a scent of smoke, not from storm or lightning, but from fire. Someone had returned. Later that afternoon, he saw the riders again. Only this time there were 5. They came armed, their leader wearing a silver badge dulled by dust. "We're taking a look around," he said coldly. "Heard strange things been happening here. We aim to find out why." Luke's hand hovered near his holster, but before he could speak, the earth trembled, a deep, guttural sound rolling beneath their feet. The men froze. Dusty stepped forward, his hooves striking the ground with slow, deliberate rhythm. Then the wind rose, howling through the canyons like a warning cry. The leader's horse panicked, throwing him off, and before he could rise, the air was filled with the echo of hoofbeats, unseen, countless, circling them from every direction. The riders fled in terror, chased by nothing but wind and memory. Luke stood still, his pulse calm. The spirits had made their stance clear. The land would not be claimed by greed again. In the days that followed, Luke became a man transformed. The townsfolk who once mocked him began to speak his name with reverence and fear. They said his ranch was haunted, that the broke cowboy had made a deal with the spirits. But Luke didn't correct them. Let them whisper. The truth was too sacred for idle tongues. He had learned that protection was not granted. It was earned through pain, humility, and devotion. Dusty, now fully restored, moved with a strength that defied his years. His coat gleamed under the sun, and when he ran, it was as if the desert itself bowed beneath his stride. Luke started repairing more than just fences and barns. He rebuilt the well, uncovering clear water that hadn't flowed in decades. He planted new seeds in the soil, and for the first time, they took root. Every corner of the land began to breathe again. The same townsfolk who once laughed at his ruin now rode past in silence, uneasy in the presence of something greater than understanding. Luke didn't seek their approval. The land's heartbeat was all the validation he needed. But peace in the West was never meant to last. One night, a gunshot cracked through the silence. Luke bolted upright, rifle in hand, and ran outside. Dusty stood tense near the gate, nostrils flaring. A lantern swayed by the fence, and there, by the oak tree, lay one of the torches he'd seen before. But this time, it burned blue. That unnatural flame cast shadows that twisted across the ground like spirits of war. Luke's heart pounded. Whoever had lit that torch wasn't from town. They had come for the amulet. He mounted Dusty, and together they rode toward the canyon once more. The desert wind howled, carrying voices from the past, chants, cries, and thunderous hooves. As they neared the cave, Luke saw movement within. 3 figures cloaked in darkness, digging at the chamber wall, prying stones free in search of what they thought was treasure. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the cavern. But when they turned, he saw not fear, but madness in their eyes. Men blinded by greed, deaf to warning. The amulet burned like fire against his chest. Dusty charged forward, hooves striking sparks from stone. The wind roared through the cave, knocking torches from the walls. One of the intruders screamed as shadows erupted from the carvings, the spectral horses bursting free in blinding light. The cave shook, the ground split, and the men were gone, swallowed by the same earth they had tried to steal from. When silence returned, Luke stood breathless, the amulet pulsing softly. Dusty stood beside him, calm as dawn. The spirits had spoken again, and their message was final. The secret of the Apache would remain protected, through him, through the horse, and through the land itself. The morning after the cave incident, the sky was washed clean, a soft gold spreading across the desert, as if the storm had never existed. Luke rode back slowly, his clothes torn, his face streaked with dust and sweat. But inside him, something had settled. The fear was gone, replaced by quiet purpose. He understood now that the land didn't belong to him. He belonged to it. The spirits hadn't chosen him because he was strong or brave. They'd chosen him because he was broken, because only the shattered can hear the whispers of the earth without trying to command them. When he reached the ranch, the oak tree swayed gently, its branches humming with life. The blue torch had vanished, replaced by a fresh carving in the bark, a spiral surrounded by horses, glowing faintly under the morning light. He ran his fingers along it, feeling warmth pulse beneath the wood. It was a sign, a promise that balance had been restored. Dusty grazed nearby, calm and steady, his mane glinting like gold. Luke watched him for a long time, realizing that their bond had gone beyond life and blood. They were no longer just man and horse. They were keepers of something far older than either of them. As the days passed, news spread through the nearby towns about the strange light in the canyon, the echoing hoofbeats that followed trespassers, the way the land around Luke's ranch seemed greener than the rest. Folks stopped calling him the bro cowboy. They started calling him the keeper. Some came seeking blessings, others answers. Luke spoke little, offering only water and silence. The ones who stayed long enough understood. The peace they felt there wasn't his doing. It came from the ground itself, from the pact between earth, spirit, and courage. Every sunset, Luke and Dusty would ride out to the canyon rim, watching the light bleed into the horizon. The world felt quieter there, as if the desert itself was catching its breath. Sometimes, Luke could swear he saw figures in the distance, shadowy riders galloping through the dunes, fading as quickly as they appeared. He no longer feared them. They were the ancestors, the guardians of old, forever circling the land they once protected. And now, he rode among them. But deep inside, Luke knew the story wasn't over. The desert never rests. It only waits. The amulet still glowed at night, faintly but alive, as if holding back a secret yet to be revealed. He could feel another shift coming, not of destruction, but of passage. Something within him whispered that his time as keeper was drawing toward an end, and that soon, the land would call another. The question was not when, but who. It was a moonless night when Luke heard it. A cry carried through the wind, soft yet urgent. He stepped out from the cabin, rifle in hand, and saw a small figure stumbling along the fence line. A boy, no older than 12, clutching a satchel and limping from exhaustion. Luke rushed forward, helping him to his feet. The child's eyes were wide, frightened but filled with something familiar, the same lost hunger Luke once carried in his own youth. "Please," the boy gasped. "They said there's a man here who protects the land." Luke hesitated, then nodded. "You found him." He brought the boy inside, gave him water and bread, and listened as he spoke between breaths. The boy had no home, no family. Only a story his grandfather had told him about sacred land where spirits still walked and a horse of fire that guarded its heart. Luke felt the air change as he listened. The boy's words weren't random. They were memory. He took the amulet from around his neck and placed it on the table. The turquoise eyes gleamed faintly, reflecting in the boy's wide gaze. Dusty lifted his head outside, snorting once, as if recognizing an old soul in the child's presence. Over the next few days, the boy stayed, helping with the chores, learning to care for the horses, to fix the fences, to listen to the land. He was quiet but observant, too aware for someone so young. Luke watched him closely, sensing the inevitable. The amulet grew warmer whenever the boy was near, the same way it once did when Luke first touched it beneath the oak. The land had chosen again. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Luke called the boy over. "This place, it doesn't belong to me," he said softly. "It belongs to those who can hear it, and I think it's been calling your name." The boy didn't answer. He simply reached out, placing his small hand over the amulet. The desert wind rose, carrying the faint sound of hoofbeats, not from Dusty, but from beyond. The earth trembled gently beneath their feet, a heartbeat shared between past and future. Luke smiled then, a tired but peaceful smile, understanding at last that every guardian was once a wanderer, every wanderer once a lost child. And when the cycle began again, it was never an ending, only a continuation of the story written in the dust. That night, under the vast silence of the desert sky, Luke saddled Dusty one last time. Together, they rode into the canyon, where the wind whispered their names like prayer. By dawn, only the boy remained at the ranch, the amulet glowing softly against his chest. From somewhere deep within the canyons came the sound of a single horse neighing, proud, eternal, unbroken. The legacy of the broke cowboy and his old horse lived on, not in gold or glory, but in the heartbeat of the West itself, a story the earth would keep telling, for as long as the wind remembers. The wind still whispered across the desert, carrying the faint echo of hooves long gone. The boy stood at the edge of the ranch, the rising sun painting the sky in golden fire, the amulet gleaming softly against his chest. Somewhere in the distance, he could almost hear Luke's voice, calm, steady, and certain, like the desert itself. The story of the broke cowboy had not ended. It had simply changed form. Because legends don't die in the West. They evolve, passing from one soul to another, binding generations through courage, faith, and the quiet understanding that even broken men can guard something eternal. The land was alive again. What once was barren now shimmered with life. Crops growing where none had dared to bloom, streams flowing with the clarity of truth. The boy felt it in his bones, the same rhythm Luke once did, the heartbeat of the earth, ancient and patient. Dusty grazed nearby, his mane catching the sunlight like a living flame. In that moment, everything made sense. It was never about wealth or inheritance. It was about listening to the whispers beneath the wind, about understanding that even the most shattered beginnings can lead to sacred ends. And as the morning stretched across the horizon, a single thought echoed through the silence. A truth the West had been trying to teach since the first hoof struck its soil, that guardianship isn't claimed by power, but earned through humility. Luke hadn't just protected the land, he had restored its soul. The boy now carried that same burden, that same gift, proof that every ending is simply another chance for the story to begin anew. The spirit of the Apache, the wisdom of the horse, and the courage of one man had become one unbroken thread woven into the desert's fabric. The wind rose once more, swirling dust and light around the boy as he lifted his gaze toward the canyon. Somewhere beyond the horizon, he felt Luke's presence, not as a ghost, but as a guardian, forever part of the land he loved. The horse neighed softly beside him, and for a heartbeat, he could almost see them, man and beast, riding together across the glowing ridge, fading into legend. The story of the broke cowboy would be told and retold, not as a tale of loss, but as a reminder that even ruin can lead to revelation, and that those who listen to the land may one day hear eternity itself speaking back. So if this story stirred something inside you, if it made you feel the pull of the horizon, the weight of legacy, or the quiet courage of men who keep their promises, then let it live on. Share it. Let others feel its wind. Subscribe, so you can ride with us through more stories that echo the heart of the Old West. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what the spirit of this tale awakened in you, and keep your eyes on the horizon. Because out there, somewhere between the dust and the dawn, the next legend is already waiting to be told.